Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. And as we continue working our way through Margaret Fraser's Dame Fervisa Medieval Mystery series, we have now reached the 8th book in the series, The Maiden's Tale. This picks up, not shockingly, after the last one, because of course at the end of the last book, the prioress was basically booted out, because of course Domina Edith had died, and Dame Alice had been voted in as prioress because people were trying to appease her ego and accidentally voted her in the process. And then Alice went on an ego trip that, for all that we're supposed to sympathize with her, as I said last time, I just can't, because she is the worst. And so in this book, we now have the lovely gentleman who is supposed to actually be officially in charge of, who is actually supposed to sort of, in effect, be handling the authority of St. Frida Sweets, because the thing is, of course, that women are, to submit to men. They are, in effect, to be man's helpmeet, etc., etc. And so, what happens is that Abbot Gilbert is the man who sort of has ultimate authority over St. Frida Sweets, that most of the time, the nuns are allowed to kind of do their own thing. It's not really his business to poke his nose in where it's not wanted. But the problem is, of course, that Alice has effectively run the nunnery into the ground, and she's eaten up all of their money and, caused a whole bunch of problems. And so Abbot Gilbert has sort of come through there, and he said, all right, you guys are just, you clearly can't handle yourselves. And so what he basically does is he says, I'm going to install a different prioress, because we're not going to let you elect one, because look what happened when you guys elected one last time. I'm going to install my sister, who is a nun. He's not going to have a not nun installed, but I'm going to have my sister and pull her out of the Benedictine nunnery over in London, and we're just going to transfer her over here, and she's going to be your prioress. And, of course, the nuns of St. Frida Sweets aren't particularly happy about having some outsider just sort of get shoved in. And then Abbot Gilbert says, by the way, I'm taking Dame Fervisa and Dame Perpetua with me. Dame Perpetua is an afterthought. She's kind of just there because he wants Dame Fervisa, and as a nun, she can't go around without a female person with her to, do the proprieties. And so Abbot Gilbert basically brings Dame Fervisa along because he's very, very aware that Fervisa is cousins with the wife of the wife of a duke, wife of one of the two most powerful, Fervisa's cousin is wife to one of the most powerful men in England. Just, he is, that it's very, very important that he basically managed to parade around whatever influence that he has, because abbots and bishops and so on are very political creatures. And Fervisa finds herself dragged to London, and then finds herself dragged into a whole bunch of politicking, because it turns out that her cousin is trying to get the French prince returned to France because they're hoping to make peace with France, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff. But Fervisa basically spends the whole book just really in dire emotional straits because she doesn't want to be there and she doesn't want to be doing this politicking, and she deeply, deeply disapproves of Bishop Beaufort because Bishop Beaufort is a politician and he is very deeply less concerned about the soul and deeply less concerned about any of those things than he is about his politics. And this actually becomes very, very clear at the end of the book when he has forcibly set her to investigating a murder that, she doesn't, the thing is that she started investigating it on her own, but she really, really, really doesn't like it when he tells her that she has to do it. And I suspect that she's right in her self-assessment that some of that is pride because she doesn't like being told to do things by some guy. But part of it, I fear, is that it's such strong evidence that he is politicking. Because yes, she can do it. She's capable of doing it. She's smart and clever and thinks, out through motive and opportunity and all of those things. But the fact that he's having her do it rather than somebody who should illicitly be doing it means that he wants it found out on the quiet, that he doesn't want any of this exposed, which means that this is all coming back to politicking. And to be ordered to do so by him is an indication that A, he's using her, because what he's doing is not, what he's asking her to do doesn't have to do with her vocation as a nun, and it doesn't have to do with his ostensible vocation as a bishop. What he's doing doesn't have to do with the church, doesn't have to do with saving souls, doesn't have to do with spreading the gospel, doesn't have to do with prayer or any of the things that she became a nun to be or do. He's asking her because he's doing his politics, and she objects very, very strenuously to this and really, really doesn't like him. That she gives him a certain amount of leeway because her uncle, Thomas, who she loved very, very dearly, was very, very close friends with Bishop Beaufort. And to an extent, she gives him some leeway, I think, on that. But, since the first time she met him, she has given him progressively less and less leeway, because he is extremely autocratic. He is giving orders, and it's all very well and good to say you have sworn to obedience, but the implication is I'm sworn to obedience in relation to the church, in relation to my duties, in relation to, the improvement of the nunnery. I think in a lot of ways her submission to Domina Alice would have been less aggravating than Bishop Beaufort, because Alice is at least trying ostensibly to do things for the church, whereas Beaufort is just politicking. And, when we get to the end of the book and we find out that he's protecting a man who has literally gone and murdered one person and tried to murder another, the titular Maiden, in fact, because Jane is a young woman who was sent to a nunnery when she was very, very young because she wasn't the boy that her mother had been hoping for, and so her mother just said, well, she's born with a big birthmark on her face, screw it, I'm sending her to a nunnery. And she was sent to a nunnery and she was expected to take vows, but she, in the end, refused. And actually, Margaret Fraser at the end of this book says, we know almost nothing about her, save that she is listed as having been Jane with a blemish on her face who refused to take orders. And the thing is that she refuses, and she is effectively rescued from being forced into becoming a nun by Fervisa's cousin, who bails her out and takes her on and arranges a marriage for her, and it looks like at the end of this book like that's a marriage that's actually going to work out quite well. But she's nearly murdered by the end of the book by the same guy who murdered someone at the start of the book, and Beaufort is protecting this man, which Fervisa finds very, very appalling. And eventually they do track down the real murderer, but not until after Fervisa has had to force Beaufort into, among other things, taking away this spy that he had placed in Fervisa's cousin's household. And, they'd place this woman they'd place this man in Fervisa's cousin's household on the basis of, he'll seduce one of those weak-willed women and get information that way, and when he doesn't succeed, because Jane isn't stupid, he's hitting on her. The thing is that after he fails to seduce, he says, by the way, why don't you have sex with me? Here, I've got a whole bunch of things that you promised to keep safe for your mistress. And, Jane's just like, no, I'm not going to sleep with you because you're blackmailing me. And, the whole thing. And this is just a book where Fervisa spends the whole book just so done with everything. And she's not, and the worst of it is that she's not done with everything because of some of these books where she's dealing with idiots. She's just done with the fact that everybody is just constantly politicking, and she wants to have nothing to do with it, but she's basically been ordered to. She's been forced into a position where she can't do otherwise. The one thing I will say about this is her cousin Alice is married, but has fallen in love with the French prince who has been kept captive in England for years and years and years and years. And Alice has wound up falling in love with him. She hasn't broken her vows to her husband, but she has fallen in love with him, and I think Fervisa's lack of sympathy on this, I think, is very, very telling about Fervisa's devotion to being a nun, because she is a bride of Christ and has never found a man who could interest her more than being a nun. And Fervisa has basically no sympathy for the fact that Alice has fallen in love with Orléans, because the thing is that there are some people who fling themselves headlong into falling in love, because these tend to be the kind of people who are in love with the idea of falling in love. But it's very, very clear from this that what happened with Alice and Orléans is that these two people met, and they got along well, and they understood each other, and they could talk about all sorts of things, and they fell in love in the way of people who match well as people. And that this is not a thing that you can avoid. This isn't, that kind of falling in love is not one of those things that you're making a choice about. That's the kind of falling in love that sneaks up on you because you're friends with somebody first, and then it takes that step from being something more than mere friendship. And Alice and Orléans both know their duty, and they both know that they can't have what they really want, and so they don't ever do anything. But he writes her poetry. And I think Fervisa lacks sympathy for this. And it's a lot of times you can see, she has a lot of sympathy for a lot of different angles. She doesn't tend to have sympathy for somebody when they drive her up the wall, but Alice in this particular case isn't driving her up the wall, but Fervisa, I think that this is the one real gap in understanding that she has. But I'm basically at the end of my time, so I guess that's everything, and hopefully I'll be finished with the Palliser novel by next week. I don't know if I will. We'll find out. And I'll see you all next week.